So we're going to use this fairly simple fruit and jug still life setup as more of a warm-up exercise than a painting, and we're going to practice seeing colours and values, and also some edge blending on the fruit. And I've chosen this to have a good range of fairly bright colours and also the white. So we get practice in doing lights and shadows on different coloured objects. And we're going to be needing our colour isolator, which I stole from Paul Foxton, which is just a piece of grey card. This is it's near to a mid-value grey as I could get on my printer, with a little square cut out so we can put it over the picture and really see what the colours are. So I've pre-done the drawing, and so let's start over on the left and then work our way to the right, and we'll do I think we'll do the fruit first and then we'll tackle the jug at the end. So let's have a look at this lime we have here. It's a very bright green, and we have the light side and the shadow side. We're going to do one colour for the light side and one colour for the shadow side. And before we use our little colour isolator, we're going to have a guess first and see how good we are at guessing. Now, as well as your colour isolator, a value scale would be useful, which of course I've lost, and I should have had out beforehand when I haven't. Hang on, let me pause. Okay, so this is our value scale. 0 to 10, 0 is black, and then 10 is white. This I've printed out on my printer, and printers vary, and if I compare, so this is absolute, these are accurate neutrals. You'll find that even in the ones that you can buy in the art shops, your value scales differ. So a neutral 5 on here, if I compare it to my Munsell chips, it's different. It's not too bad actually. It's not too bad, but it's the neutral 5 in Munsell is actually lighter than what I have on here, and it's near enough. It doesn't matter too much, but if you are going to use a value scale, stick with 1 and don't chop and change. So, okay, this lime. Now, let's start the light side. It's green, and it's a yellowy green, but what kind of value do we think this is? And I'm going to have a guess and say, I'm going to guess it's around a mid value, maybe slightly higher, maybe a 6. So that's our guess, just by looking at it. And then we're going to get a better guess by using our isolator and just putting it over the colour we want to match. So if this is a neutral 5, it's definitely lighter than that. And if we then put our value scale against it, which value is it? Now this is tricky because it's a curved surface obviously, so it's not that one. I think it's close. That's too light, although we might be close. I'm going to say it's here. It's around a 6, but possibly maybe a 6.5. And bright colours are often difficult to judge the value of. So let's try and mix up this colour. Let's do it on a swatch before we put it on paper. Pop you there. I think you might stay. Yes, you stay. I'm just going to use a bit of scrap. I'm going to mix up this colour. Now, even though this is the light side of the lime, the colour is very intense. The colour is very bright, which has high chroma if you want to use the Munsell terms. So we're going to have to use quite a bit of pigment here. Now, a yellow-green. I'm going to start with my greenish yellow, and this I think is Hansa Yellow Light. A cadmium lemon or a lemon yellow would also do pretty well for this. I'm going to put a fair amount of pigment in there. And now we want to make it green, so I'm now going to go to my blue, my greenish blue. I've got two blues here. I've got ultramarine, which is a reddish blue, and I've got, this is actually cobalt blue, but you could use phthalo blue. You could possibly use cerulean at a pinch, but cerulean hasn't got quite as much pigmenting power, so it may not be strong enough. And I'm just going to use a little bit of blue and mix that in. And I'm not really worrying about the value right now, but I want to see that I've got fairly close to this hue. And actually, I think that's pretty much there. So that's quite a lot of yellow and not very much blue. And I want it to be about a 6. So you can see I'm sort of seeing what the consistency is on the palette. It's just sort of moving around quite nicely. So I reckon we're probably close to a 6. Maybe a little light. Yep, I think that's a little light. Now it's on the paper, and of course this is watercolor, so it's going to dry lighter. A little blue. Now it's a very bright colour, so we're not going to have to grey. We don't have to grey this down very much. I think I'm gonna go with that actually. And let's put it straight on the paper. Often we go through the whole set of colours before we put it on the paper, but let's live dangerously and just move straight to the paper. Now I'm just going to use this whole colour for half of this lime. I'm hoping I've got enough pigment in here. I'm just going to leave a little bit of white here for a highlight, and I'm going to try and touch the paper as only once. So once the pigment goes down, I'm not going to go back in. Let's go around this little knobbly bit at the end. Okay, and I'm hoping this is going to be wet enough. I'm going to go and wash my brush. Just leave it slightly damp, just dab it on a paper towel. I'm going to blend these edges so when we come back in with the dark, we won't get a hard line there. I'm going to leave those little bits of white because I kind of like them. And it's got, if you only touch the paper once with the brush, watercolour does that wonderful thing where the pigments kind of disperse and they slightly granulate, and you can see a few of the brush strokes as well. So I like that very much. So this is the light side. We're now going to mix up a colour for the dark side. Let's clean off my palette a little bit. Ding ding ding. Alright, now I'm going to do the same again. I'm going to have a look, I'm going to have a guess, and then we're going to use our colour isolator and our value scale to check or correct what our guess is. And this is a great way to learn, because if you get it wrong and then you check, you get immediate feedback as to what you did wrong. Now let's have a look. So what colour do we think this is? This is a green, but it's going into the shadow, and I think that's probably quite a bluish green. So let's call it a bluey green. And the value, this is the light, we said this was about a 6. It's probably at least 2 value steps down, maybe even 3. So between a 3 and a 4, which is really quite dark for a fruit, I would say. So I'm actually not going to use my scale, since that's slightly off. I'm going to use my chips. So let's try a neutral 3. Put that against there. Yeah, that's pretty close actually. And even though this is a different colour, I'm putting my chip up against it. I'm squinting at it so it takes the colour out, and I can see whether that's the right value or not. Let's try 4. I think it's not going to be a 4. Yeah, it's obviously not 4. 3 looks good. If we go down to a 2, that's obviously too dark. So we're around about a 3, which is 3 steps down, which is quite a lot. Right, now we said it was a bluey green. Let's have a look. Oh, actually, I mean, it's a fairly dark green, and you can see how dark it is against that neutral 5 there. It's still quite a yellow green, a bit more blue in it than we had for the light side. So how are we going to mix this one up? We could just go with blue and green, blue and yellow to make a green and add in more blue, but I think that's going to shift it far too blue. So again, we're going to start with the yellow, but instead of using blue to make green, we're going to use a bit of black. Now you can use ivory black. I've actually got lamp black in here, which is very intense, so you've got to be careful with it. As you mix that in, you can see it goes a really quite nice olive green. Right, now that colour is not really dark enough, and I don't think it's quite blue enough. So let's add in a little bit of our blue. It's the same blue as we used before. Still not dark enough. A bit more blue. I don't want it to go grey. So of course when I put the yellow in, it will lighten it so little. Right, so let's just test on our piece of paper. It's not quite dark enough. I mean, we'd have to have really quite a lot of pigment in there. And I think with watercolour, you can go a little lighter than you see. You don't want it to have that really washed out look, but you need the paint to flow around for the watercolour to do its thing. Okay, and let's put in this dark side. I think we're good there. Now, there's a little bit of detail on this lime, these little stripes, but I think we're just gonna put in the shallow side to show the form. There's a little bit of reflective light up here, which I'm going to ignore. So let's just put in this dark side of the lime. And I'm going to blend this. I could have done a little more blue, I think. With a damp brush and just pulling this over the edge. I'm wetting the piece of the paper that's outside the pigment. That looks terrible. Just pull this out a little bit. Now that looks really quite stark, and I'm kind of going, oh my goodness, what's going on? But yeah, I think when it dries, we will be okay with that. So that's what we've got for our lime. And we will come back and do some details, and it will sharpen up the whole thing. Let's move on to our apple. Now, our apple has this big highlight here, which I've just lightly marked in with some pencil. And it's a red apple. It's quite a dark red apple. And I'm doing something I would say you shouldn't do. I'm going to go back in. So, what value do we think this is on the light side? Now, it's hard actually to pick a spot because there is quite a lot of colour variation in here. So, let's pick something around here. I would say this is probably around a 5, a mid value. So, let's do first thing, let's just put our checker on it. Yeah, that probably is around a 5. It's roughly the same value as the grey surround. Let's just check with our chips. Yeah, I think we're close to that. As for the colour, let's have a look at that. It's a lovely colour. Now, it did at first glance look very pinkish, this apple, but it's actually it's got a fair amount of yellow in it. So we're going to start with our pinkish red, which I have. This is permanent rose, or quinacridone rose, something rosish. Alizarin crimson would probably do. Quinacridone red would probably do it a pinch, although that's not quite as pinkish. And that's too pink. You can see if you compare to the square on the palette. So I'm just going to add in a small amount of yellow, and this is really tickling it. we're not scooping up armfuls of pigment and putting it in there. And I'm keeping the pigment on the palette. It's slightly liquid, but it's not too liquid. Okay, that's not enough. I think it's not going to be dark enough. So a bit more pigment in there. Alright. It's better value-wise. It's still, I know I said I was tickling this, but I was wrong. Okay. Now that to me, they may look very, very similar, but once you start doing this, you get really, really sensitized to very small differences in colour. And it makes your paintings not look like everybody else's paintings. Because everybody uses the same pigments, a lot of people's paintings look very similar colour-wise, and you don't need an awful lot of variation to make something look unique. So let's do this apple, and again we're just going to do the light side, and I'm just having a look as to where the lights. I'm going to go over this bit. I'm going to leave this white bit for the highlight. Okay. And I'm going to go through that. I'm trying just to touch the paper once. And once the paint is down, damp brush around the edges. And that gets very dark down there, so alright, okay. Got some slight blossoms in there. And now the dark side. Now we said this was a 5 on the light side, it's going to go darker. So we're probably down around a 3. And the colour itself, there's a little bit of reflected light in there, which we're not gonna do. So we're gonna match to this bit. It's around about a 3. Just check that. Oh no, it's darker than 3. Oh, you can't see that. Let me try the other way. Yeah, I don't know if that shows up on the camera, but that is actually much darker. So we're down around a 2 there. Wow. That is dark. And the colour itself, ooh, really dark maroon. Now, how are we going to mix that? Well, let's start with our pinkish red. We're going to need quite a lot of this because now we could just darken this. Let's just darken this. Now we could add in some blue, but I'm just going to add in a bit of our lamp black, maybe too much. That pigment's got slightly too thick. You want it thick, but you do want it to flow on the palette. And yeah. Just a little bit of yellow, just a little bit. It's going to raise the value just slightly. But I think I'm going to go with that one. Yes, it's a very subtle change, but it's definitely worth doing. Now, our darkest bits are down next to the grapes. There's a little bit of stalk there, and it comes up. There's this divot in here which we should do something with, but let's do this shadow piece around here. So that's stalk 2, isn't it? Just putting the point of my brush where my hard edges should be. And I'm working fairly quickly, because I want to go in and soften these edges fairly fast. Right. Soften this edge. Damp brush. I'm just poking the point of the brush into the wet paint. And and just a little bit down here. This is all very murky down here, so it doesn't have to be. And I'm just going to pull this across just to make this a soft edge. And finally this divot at the top. Now we could wait until the end and do this. We may need to go back. Yeah, I haven't got enough pigment left. So we'll come back at the end to make that divot. If you look at it, the light edges at the front and the dark edges at the back. There we go. Right, now we've left the grapes. I'm going to leave the grapes till the end of the fruit. Let's do this lemon. Now lemons. Yellow is always hard, and shadows on lemons are always hard because you feel as though it shouldn't be that dark and it shouldn't be the colour they actually are, but they are. So let's start with the light side. Now yellow is one of those colours that when it's really, really bright, it's actually very light in value. A bright red and a bright blue tend to be quite far down the value scale, but yellow is right up there in the 8s or 9s. So from experience, I know this is going to be an 8 or 9. And if I put an 8 against that, it's probably around there. I'll put one slightly down at an 8.5, 7.5. Yeah, maybe 7.5. So we're up there. And the colour itself, it's yellow, but it's just tending towards an orangey yellow in this photo. So we're going to take our yellow, which is a greenish yellow, and we're just going to have to tip it slightly towards orange. So if I put that down there, you can see, yeah, it's just slightly too far on the green side. Now I'm going to put, we could use our orangey red. I've got a little bit of cadmium orange in here, and I'm just going to put just a little stroke in there just to shift that yellow, and that is enough, I think. If you're going to use your orangey red, obviously you'd use less because it's further away on the colour wheel, but that would also work. Right, now let's put this in. Our shadow comes around here, and I've got to put in a little bit of a highlight there. Okay, so again, just as few strokes as you possibly can. Leave that highlight. Alright, I'm just going to go down there. Wash my brush. Little dab on a paper towel just to get the excess water off. And soften that edge there. Nice. Now there's a little bit of light in there. I might just put a dab. Just to put a bit of colour in that bit. Okay, right, now, dark side of the lemon. This is where things get crazy. Let's have a look, let's see what we think that value is. We know that the light side of the lemon's quite a high value, 7.5 or 8. So it's going to be at least probably a 5. And what is that colour? Now I'm at an advantage here since I've done this quite a lot, and even so, when I put this colour isolator on, I think you'll be surprised. Ooh, that's brown, and it's fairly dark brown as well. Let me just sort of 4 in there. Yeah, I would say that's a value 4. We've gone quite a way down the value scale, and even when I take the colour isolator and I look at the lemon, it's still quite hard for me to see that as brown, but brown it is. So that's what we're going to mix. Right. palette clean. And so we have this colour, it's quite a warmish brown. So orangey brown, let's start with burnt sienna. Now if I put that down there, I can see immediately that it's actually got a lot of yellow in it. So I'm going to, I could put yellow in it, but yellow's going to raise the value, so I'm actually going to put in yellow ochre, which is slightly darker. I'm just going to test that. Not dark enough. I'm really loath to go darker. I could go dark with black. I'm actually going to put a bit of burnt umber in it. Right, yeah, I'm going to go with that. And it's like consistency of heavy cream on the palette. Right, let's put this dark side in. We've got this little bit of light showing through here, which I want to keep. So with my brush point towards the hard edges, and it gets a lot lighter over there, so I'm gonna leave it like that. Again, rinse my brush out. And then soften this edge around here. This is looking terrible. Let's darken that slightly. And a little bit more colour up here. Should probably wait for this to dry before putting any tweaks on it. There we go. Let me just have a look at this colour over here. Yeah, this colour. I don't know. I think we are close. Now I may leave that to dry and just come and put a few changes on that. But I think we're okay. A little bit of tip that's just going to be yellow. I just want to pull out just a little bit, because I want to put that as yellow. Okay, now we get to the fun bit, the grapes. Now grapes, they've got light and shadow, but they've got an extra dimension to them. Now the dark side of the grapes, I think, is just very, very, it's basically in these crevices. It's very, very dark. But the grapes themselves, they have a little light and shadow, but they also have this bloom on them, and then the non-bloom areas. And I think we should paint those. I'm in two minds whether we should. Let's have a go. So there's the odd little highlight, which I'll just mark in, which we probably should. It gives us a bit of form to the grapes. The lightest colour is this bloom colour, which looks like to be a lilac. And then the non-bloom colour is this, I don't know, that sort of red, deep red, crimson, burgundy maybe, that kind of colour. So let's have a guess as to what's going on there. Now that colour, I'm saying that's lilac. It's like a reddish purple, and it's quite light in value, I think. I could be wrong. Maybe a 6 or a 7. I'll put this on and see what it says. Oh, I don't know. No, I think that's maybe it's a 6. It says 6 out. No, it's 6-ish right on this side, but the bits that are facing me, I don't know, maybe, I think we're averaging around a 6. And the darkest ones are probably around a 4. This bloom piece here, maybe slightly darker than a 4. Yeah, that looks darker. Let's do a 3.5. I don't think it's right down at 3. No, no, that's the wrong way. So that's a 3.5. Yeah, I reckon we're 3.5, which is pretty dark. So that's 6 for the light side. And what is that colour? It is kind of lilac, isn't it? So how are we going to make a lilac? Well, back to our pinkish red again. That's the closest one we have. And let's add in a blue. Now, we're going to add in a purpley blue, not a greenish blue, because we want to go around the wheel to our nearest blue. And our purpley blue is ultramarine, so a little bit of ultramarine until it's quite a lot actually, until you feel as though you've got the right kind of colour. Now that I suspect would be too light, too dark, just from the consistency on the palette. Yeah, it's too dark, but it's pretty close. So just a little more water into that. Yeah, maybe just a tad more blue. Okay, let's go with you. Now, for this, apart from this stalk bit coming out, I'm just going to put all the colour over all of the grapes, apart from these little white highlight bits. So, I'm hoping I've mixed up enough pigment. I'm starting out where the hard edges are. I'm gonna make it, oh, I'm going over my stalk. As even as I can. It looks kind of dark, doesn't it? Well, we did the measuring. It looked good. We've got to trust ourselves. Right, there's my stalk. I might put this stalky stuff in. In some gouache later. Alright, there we go. Now I'm hoping, on the camera it looks very dark. It's not actually that dark in real life, and it is, as it's watercolour, it's going to dry lighter. Let me just put in, that's a bit of apple under there, isn't it? It can be a great colour for now. Okay. There we go. Wow, I'm trusting in the process, but I'm not happy with it right now. Let's let this dry, and then we're going to layer over. Now, I suggest we do this in two sections. We should put in the shadow side of each grape so we can show the form of the grapes, but these little non-bloom areas I suggest we do afterwards. They've got quite hard edges on them, whereas the shadow sides, they have soft edges. So let's do it in that order. Now let's have a look at our shadow side, what kind of colour we have. Alright, that's again quite a dark, probably a 4, maybe a 3. Yeah, at least a 3. Oof. And it's a purpley red. I might need a slightly smaller brush for this, but let's see. Now, the other thing we have to remember here is we already have come down and we're layering it on top, so we don't need to make it as dark as it seems there, because we already have a layer of dark on it. That's going to be a little redder, I think. So that is, it's slightly warmer than that. A bit more. Okay, I'm happy with that, I think. Now, I might need 2 brushes for this because I want to soften as we go. We're going to put in the shadow side and then soften the edge. There's a little bit of reflected light in here, which we're not... well, that one we might do. We'll see. Let's start over at the left and just stroke in the shadow. Just one piece at a time. And then take another brush if you have it, just so you can save the pigment on your first brush, really, and soften that edge. And in here, there's a cast shadow on that bottom one, which I'm not going to do quite yet. A little bit of space for that little bit of reflected light. And smooth across that. Let's put that bit of reflected, sorry, cast shadow in here. So, and this one down here. So this has got a cast shadow that's very dark, so I'm just gonna, and a little bit of reflected light around, so let's leave a little halo around there for the reflected light. In here, and leave the stalk. And in here, now this is very dark in here, this isn't grape, well, it's mid-deep grape. So we're going to layer over that afterwards, but right now we're just putting in the shape of this one. And this one actually has most of the shadow over here. Comes down a little bit down there. Oops, your softening brush tends to get pigment on it, so I need a rinse every now and again. There we go. And this one. So I'm doing this, I'm seeing actually how the colours vary across the grapes. There's actually quite a lot of orange down there. And soften. And in here it all gets a bit complicated down here. There we go. Yeah, I was too dark. I should have probably just varied that colour across those grapes. But it's done now, so it's down. Alright, now I'm going to leave the bloom parts of that until we put the jug in, and maybe some of the shadows. I don't know if it's going to take it and look good. And I won't be able to judge that until everything else is in. So alright, just standing back to see what it's looking like. Some of the shadows should have come up further. The colours are looking good, which is what we're mainly aiming at. So those grapes should have been a bit lighter. Darn it. Right, jug. Now, these shadows on these photos are very, very boring. Very boring colour-wise. So we're going to measure their values quite accurately, but then we're going to make a decision do we paint them the boring grey they are, or do we push them slightly, probably towards blue? I think we're probably going to push them towards blue. So let's have a look at this jug. And so the values we have on this, we have this value in here. We have this dark here, and this has a lot of reflected light, so this is kind of green in there, which we should probably do. The other bits of reflected light I'm not so worried about, but this one should probably go in. And we have this value here, and this is going to be interesting. So the shadow behind the lime, and is that the lime? No, that's the jug shadow, is actually very close in value to the value on the handle, so that's going to be tricky. Then there's these shadows in here, and then the cast shadow. So let's do this one up here first. I'm going to reckon that's maybe just slightly lighter than the mid value. Let's say is this a 6? Yeah. Looks darker on the camera, but when I'm sitting in front of it, that's bang on a 6. And this is a neutral grey. Yeah, we can say the shadows are actually slightly blue on the photo. I think we should push them even more blue. Right, now what else? So there's this one, which is probably the same value as here. That one's slightly darker. So this value is the same value as that value, and underneath I suspect it starts, no, it's much lighter. Right, and that's a 5, so that's a 1 value change, and that's a 5 in there too, and that's very green. If I put this on here, ooh, green. We might do the value and then layer over that. And this one down here is probably nice. Yeah, it's even darker down there. Right, so, and that's really quite dark in there. So we need a 6 to start with. Well, let's mix up a 5, because a lot of it is 5. If we need to go darker, we can layer over it. And this bit, which is slightly lighter, we'll just make slightly lighter by softening that edge. There's very slight value changes that show that the form of the jug, but we're going to put the mid values in first and then come back and do those. If we try and put these very, very slight value changes in, it's really easy to overdo it. So let's start with a grey. Now my favourite grey mixture is ultramarine and burnt sienna, so let's start with that. Oops. Now right, now that's a pretty, I don't like that very much. I'm actually going to put in some cerulean. I like cerulean in shadows because it doesn't have huge tinting strength, but it granulates really well and it blends smooth, it goes into smooth edges really well. So I'm just going to do that and let's see what value that thinks it is. Yeah, I reckon we're okay with that. So let's start with this jug. Now I'm going to start with this shadow up here and see how this goes. Start with my point. I'm going to use my other brush to soften out that edge. That looks very dark, doesn't it? Well, and then strip down the middle. Soften here. So I do want to have that shadow behind looking. I just love that very slight value change there. Now, just going to add in a slight drip of water into that brush. Load, do the shadow down the side. Softening as I go. And this one up here, which is really quite subtle, I think, so a little bit more water, just so I don't. Soften that underside immediately. Right, and now this bottom one. Is it actually darker than we're painting them right now? Soften around that. Alright, and then the final one, which is this main really dark stripe. I'm hoping this is dry pretty much. Clean my softening brush. Brush over that edge. That's actually quite a hard edge down there, so I'm going to leave it. While I'm down here, this cast shadow I think can go in. It will be darker right underneath, so we're going to lose some of that form right now. But let's just start to put in some of these dark pieces. Also this lime as a cast shadow. If I were painting this properly, whatever that means, I would put the cast shadows in as I was painting the fruits. Alright, just a bit of softening. Not everywhere. I think that's probably dried. Right, this back here. This may need, well, let's put this on. No, let's not do that. It's not working. We'll come back to that. Right, okay, let's have a look. Well, it could be worse. It's lacking something though. It's almost a bit too similar. Yes. Right, let's put this down here. So what next? Let's put this shadow in. I'll just mix up some more. Mix up some more blue-grey. So ultramarine and some of that sienna and a good dollop. Oops, maybe a bit more than a dollop. That'll do. Right. Let's put in this shadow back here. Again, the point of my brush is where the hard edges are. I'll leave just a little sliver of light back there. And again here. Right, and quickly with my other brush, soften. Well, I mean, it's not the worst picture I've ever done, but I think it's close. Yeah, I didn't soften this edge enough, did I? No. Well. Alright. Let's put this one in. Again, soften that edge. A little bit of colour back here, just to show the ground piece and to bring out the side of that jug. Okay. Now the background is really grey, and we're not going to do that. We're just going to put a very, very slight piece of colour on that. So quite watery. And it shouldn't be, it should be fairly perky colour. Let's see what this does. Of water. Goes greyer, darker over on the right hand side. I don't know that we really want to do that. I think it might make the picture very dead. I'm a bit worried about what we're doing right now, but we'll see. Down. And over here. Still wet, which is good. Very slight bit of colour just to take the white of the paper off. Alright. Let's see. Well, that shadow on that job is simply atrocious. I'm going to have to do something about that. Actually, I am going to put a little bit of foreground. It's slightly dark in that foreground. I'm going to make it quite blue. Right, you see, now I've got to the stage of the painting where I think, well, it's ruined. I can't make it any worse. So I'll just have some fun with it. I will try anything at this point. You gotta love painting. It's just when you think, oh, I think I might have a handle on everything. Right, okay, now this shadow is simply atrocious. I'm going to try and lift some of it. I might give this up as a bad job. This is terrible. Ugh. Well. Let's put some of this dark of the airport in. And this. Stalk type of fur. I think that should have been grape. It's quite grey out here. That's slightly darker. Yeah. Okay. Very dark for this. There's grapes in here. I like using a lot of black for this. Alright. Now. Yeah. smoothing that. This is just... Oh, this will be easy. Right under here. In here. Stalk. Here. I'm trying. Maybe too dark. It is too dark. And more blue in there. I need to put in clean brush would help. Okay, and then it comes over here too. Right. Stalk. Stalk. Some white. Right. Very slightly calligraphic. Just looking to see what else. Well, that jug shadow needs attention. It's now looking at it. It's probably the most important thing in the whole picture. It was very badly done. Bad, Michelle. Right, I'm going to stand back. Might do a bit of crying. I mean, I suppose it's not as bad as I've done worse. I'm just going to try and I'm just going to stand back here. I'm looking at this shadow here. So what I'm going to do is think I've put this in, but it's not showing the form of the jug. And I think I made this too light. So I'm going to wash over basically this whole side, just to give it some darkness. And then really smooth out that side. Does that help? Something's not helping. I don't want to kill the whole. Kill the whole thing. Right, and just joking nonsense. That's what I want this wet. Let's do some touch-ups. Let's put this small piece of intense yellow in, I think. Just needs to go in. And just a little bit of subtle shading around this lemon. I know we said we were going to do 2 colours for each fruit. But sometimes you just need a little change. It's got some very light pink around the edges of that highlight, so I get light enough pink. Let's do light. Quite enough. Right, the shadow on this line, I wonder if we can put in some of these stripes. Quite an intense green. That is on a photo, but jug, I think, is looking a little better. Oh, I might have to give this a rest. I'm going to try putting in these non-bloom pieces on the grapes. This could be a terrible mistake, but that's one more amongst many. So, let's see. Quite dark enough, is it? Quite dark enough. Here. Let's have a look. What does that look like? That's not bad, actually. That's not so bad. I'm not quite as miserable about it as I was. I'm fairly miserable. Well, I think it's safe to say this one's not going on YouTube. Oh, I don't think so. Although, in some ways it ought to. Because it shows more of the... Oh, Clamp, why did you do that? More of the reality of what it's like. Growling. Right, okay. I think I'm going to leave it undone. Of course, now I see one more thing. Put shadows across here. So too light. Could do with a bit of gouache to put on that. Oh, hang on, what is it? Naples yellow up here. Just soften that a little bit. Okay. I'm done. Yes, you live and learn. Right, well, camera's off.